occasion. Um, and this isn't for everybody, right? This is for you. Um, because if you're up right now, it's highly likely that you were anticipating this announcement also. So, just really, I ain't sorry. I'm not, like I said, I'm not as dressed up as I usually am. I don't even usually wear tank tops for these videos. But when I tell y'all I just woke up like 45 minutes ago, and I was gonna get ready and do my thing, and I was like, nah, I gotta talk about this right now. I can't wait. I can't wait. I can't. Good God Almighty. All right, people, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this live stream segment of Mikasa Sukasa, and I am your humble host, Niko House. And of course, we all received the amazing news, much anticipated news, that Bernie Sanders will launch his 2020 presidential bid. Now, some of you all don't have any mixed feelings about this whatsoever. You have already fully committed to Bernie Sanders, and you absolutely should. And you are probably right to do so. Some of you all are on the other side of that spectrum, where you refuse to be a part of the Bernie Sanders campaign and maybe have already put all of your eggs in the campaign of another, perhaps Tulsi Gabbard, which actually isn't a bad thing. Some of you all went over to vote for Trump and are now facing the ramifications of what it is like to put your eggs in the basket of a lying, thieving sociopath, because that's what Trump is. Some people hold a lot of animosity in their heart from what happened during the 2016 campaign. A lot of people who poured their heart and their soul into that campaign felt a little betrayed. They felt like they didn't get the closure that they deserved. They felt like they didn't get the fight that they fell in love with Bernie for to begin with, because he was, and by my estimation, he is indeed still a fighter. Some people don't know where they fall in as far as that spectrum is concerned, and that's okay also. But today, I hope that I can maybe help you figure out where you fit in on this entire conversation, on this campaign going forward, on Tulsi's campaign going forward. And hopefully I can give you all some context as to what exactly this means. And this doesn't, once again, when I say what this means, I'm not saying what this means, go donate to the campaign, or go vote for Bernie right now, or go vote for Tulsi right now, or I hate both. Like, no, I mean, I want you to find, by the end of this, hopefully, what you're fighting for, and figure out what you stand for, and then make your decisions with that knowledge and with that understanding going forward. So, Bernie Sanders announced this morning, and I will admit, Bernie, for me personally, and I don't know if anyone else can say this with as much conviction outside of myself, Jared, and Elizabeth Lee Beck, because you know that we were the founders of the DNC fraud lawsuit. Bernie disappointed me, to say the least. In some days, he downright pissed me off. Other days, I felt like he was misdirected or misguided. And then other days, I remember that he is human, and we are all limited to our experiences. But with that being said, like I said, I know more than any of you Some of you donated $10, $15. Some of you donated $500, $1,000. Others of you may have knocked on doors for a week. Some others may have knocked on doors for a year. I donated money. I donated my time. I started Carolina Students for Bernie Sanders, which was the largest university organization for Bernie Sanders in the entire country with over 300 members. We were featured in the New York Times and several other newspapers as well. Not only did I run that organization, but I also ran North Carolina colleges for Bernie Sanders. Through both of those organizations, we put countless hours into working with the community to organize for Bernie Sanders. We ended up winning Chapel Hill, which is where I graduated from. That's the city where I graduated from. I spent hours and hours and hours on the phone, hours and hours and hours on Facebook, defending him, educating people, growing awareness. I spent so much time traveling, networking, making the connections, which a lot of them I still have today. I was blessed in a lot of ways through the campaign. I personally gained exposure and benefited from Bernie Sanders' revolution. I was personally irritated with the campaign at times, with some of the decisions they made, and had to realize that they can't be at all of our will all the time. It wasn't feasible. I traveled to New York City with the help of Elizabeth Lee Beck and Jared H. Beck to investigate personally what took place with the vote purges or with the registration purges that eventually the New York Board of Elections ended up admitting was their fault. I went to that Board of Elections meeting, which many of you all may be familiar with, and let them know that they worked for us and it isn't the other way around, and raised hell. Now, unfortunately, after that, I did see the campaign remain in silence despite the fact that we knew that the Board of Elections had been guilty of election rigging and election fraud. I talked to people in Michigan who told me that their state director was corrupt. We exposed them. I was personally involved in exposing Aisha Dew in North Carolina, as well as a field director in South Carolina. We worked to help build Bernie Sanders' campaign up and to help create this revolution. And we worked even harder to try and save it. Through this revolution, I met Jared and Elizabeth Lee Beck, and we did start the DNC fraud lawsuit. Now, legally, I don't expect him to speak on that. That's just not wise. But my point is, if anyone has any reason and is more cognizant of all of those reasons as to why I should be and we should all be absolutely livid with Bernie Sanders, trust me, it's me. So when I also tell you that should make what I am about to tell you all the more important and all the more credible, I mean that. For all of the irritation, the heartbreak, the confusion, and the frustration that we experienced during and after the 2016 Bernie Sanders campaign, one thing still holds true, which is that the reason that we're so angry, that we're so frustrated, and that we're so irritated is because we were on the brink of a revolution that one man stood up to start and hand to us. We are in the middle, not later, not in 10 years, not in 8 years. We're in the middle of a progressive renaissance right now. Because a 70-year-old man, 72, I believe, when he started, said, you know what? I could retire. I could pack it in. You know what? I don't need to run it. Why would I run against the Clinton machine? I can't defeat it. I could spend time with my grandkids, retire in Vermont, and spend my little $300,000 of net worth of a net worth enjoying the rest of my life with my family. That man, with a 2% chance of winning, announced his candidacy in the backyard of his house in Vermont. That man who had nothing to gain stood in front of a 95% white crowd in Fort Sumter, South Carolina, and looked at each and every one of them and said, if you don't believe that systemic racism is real, if you can't see how minorities and black people and people of color are treated disproportionately in this country, then you need to wake up and open your eyes. He said this in the middle of a crowd where outside I was called a boy. I was told that, oh, you don't know anything about politics. And when they asked why, because we were talking about we were having a conversation about race, and they asked why. You should just keep to your people and those politics. This is something different. That's the kind of crowd that Bernie stood up in front of and said, there is no one more affected by the prison-industrial complex than black Americans. When he stood in front of that crowd and said, it would be foolish for you to not acknowledge that income inequality is real, but the income inequality for black people in the rest of the country is even more palpable. And no one else probably thought anything of it. But I knew, because I've done my homework and I've been paying attention to politics for some time, that in any other campaign in the Democratic primary election that early on, that was political suicide. Nobody brings up race. Nobody brings up black people. Nobody brings up black plight. Obama was black, never mentioned black people. Nobody brings up the prison industrial complex. That's political suicide. Then he goes on to talk about our Native American brothers and sisters and how we must stand up for them as much as anybody else in this country, because this land is originally theirs and they have not been able to profit or benefit from the fruits of the labor here, compared to all that they put in to basically give us the tools to create this land that we live in. What does he have to gain from that? What does he have to gain from talk? Do you understand that the unfortunate truth of the matter is Native Americans do not affect the election? And it almost seems on purpose that the states where they would have some effect on the election, as far as voting is concerned, are all done last in the Democratic primary. What did he have to gain from saying that? And yet he said it anyway. The same speech he would give in Central Park in one of the most diverse crowds that you will ever see is the same speech he gave in a gymnasium with 75 people. 95% of them are white. And it never changed. For some reason, Democrats wanted to vote for him. For some reason, independents wanted to vote for him. And for some reason, Republicans even wanted to vote for him. For some reason, it didn't matter how unpolished he was. For some reason, his accent didn't matter. He didn't speak like Obama. He didn't have the charisma of JFK. But he did something that at the time it seemed like no one else was willing to do. At a time where basically it seemed as if America had accepted its fate of neoliberalism, neoconservatism, centrism, and constant perpetual proxy warfare, he did something that we thought no one else had the courage to do. He fought. And then he turned around and looked at us and said, well, I can't do this by myself. And he said that if we joined him, we could win. He didn't say, oh, are you all with me? Like Hillary said, are you with her? I don't know if any of you have ever been to a Bernie Sanders rally, but later on in his campaign, man was a superstar. He is the true definition of a rock star if you've ever been to one of his rallies. They would scream. I'm talking about at the top of their lungs, Bernie, Bernie. Couldn't get a word off. He could not get a word. Bernie, Bernie. It sounded like, I don't know if you've all ever been to a rock concert, but imagine like Blink-182, or on the other side of that extreme, Metallica made a comeback. And they were playing some of their new songs. So the younger folks came to see them, the newer fans. But they were also playing some of the old songs that everyone had already knew and they had become famous for. So the old fans came back. And they were all sitting together in one room. And Run DMC came out. It made an appearance. And so the millennials were like, okay, let's go and put on my Run DMC shirts. And they all joined in. And every one of them are screaming at the top of their lungs with 15, 20,000 people, 8,000 in the overflow, having to watch from a television, even more people waiting in line outside, all screaming Bernie Sanders' name. And where most people would smile, most people would suck it in, bask in it, most people would be instantly corrupted by that amount of love and, quite honestly, worship, while they were screaming Bernie Sanders' name at the top of their lungs, Bernie Sanders said, no, 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 you, it is not me, it's you. This is your revolution. Stop cheering for me. When I saw that, once again, I'm like, what is wrong with this guy? This isn't normal. What's his angle? What is it? And I realized it's Bernie Sanders. Obviously, we know he got cheated. And eventually I'll let you all a little bit more into the fold. But I will say, for a fact, his campaign knows that he was cheated. I will say, for a fact, that there are people from his campaign who are very much aware that the Democratic Party was cheering on Stacey Abrams for taking on election fraud, but they would refuse to acknowledge election fraud that took place in his campaign. They are just as aware, they're just as cognizant, and they are just as pissed. I will let you know that his campaign is preparing for a bloodbath, essentially. They are not naive nor dubious to what they are about to face. They are listening to your voices. They are listening to your frustrations. They have heard them. And they are working to make sure that we are prepared for what we have to deal with going forward. But the funny thing about all of it is that even though he didn't win. He didn't win, right? Are we really going to pretend that he wasn't victorious? See, the reason I understand the frustration and the irritation, but the reason why I guess that I can never let myself get too emotionally frustrated to the point of irrationality is because in my short life, I'm only 30, but in political years, that's really young. In my short life, I've learned to not allow my victories to be defined by the establishment. What do I mean by that? I mean, yeah, if you are trying to decide whether or not Bernie Sanders in this revolution that he had started was victorious by whether or not he became president or not, then you're always, yeah, of course you think he lost. But you're also assuming that in a vacuum, winning the presidency is a victory. In a vacuum, I mean. Now, me, I decide whether somebody's victorious by the results. So let's take a look at the results. I am personally, I've been fortunate enough to speak at events in LA. I've been fortunate enough to network all over the country. I was fortunate enough that Bernie's campaign and the frustration that came from it brought me, Jared, and Elizabeth Beck together to create the DNC fraud lawsuit that ultimately exposed how the DNC feels they can run their campaigns and their primary. They ultimately expose what they think about their own registered party members. I was fortunate, just me. This is just me. I was fortunate enough for the campaign to have brought me to New York City, where we were able to expose the New York Board of Elections, where that video went viral. And everybody knew just how obscene they were running that kangaroo court that they called a Board of Elections meeting. And guess what? Those Board of Election members took a hit because of it. One of them isn't there anymore. Neither is her law firm. Because of the total consciousness that we gained from that campaign. In any other year before 2016, Standing Rock would have been obliterated and it would have never, ever been discussed. Our Native American brothers and sisters from the Sioux tribe would have dealt with that abomination of an event by themselves. But instead, everyone from that same revolution that Bernie Sanders helped to start, keeping in mind the message that revolution had reverberated throughout the country, we packed up our bags, we packed up supplies, and each of us took our turns withstanding the harshest winter that I can ever remember experiencing in my life. Fighting against impossible odds. Not knowing if we were going to win. But for whatever reason, the winning didn't matter. The solidarity did. The support did. The understanding for the Sioux tribe to let them know that they were not alone and that we're not going to ignore our Native American brothers and sisters anymore. And we will not let you endure another horror at the hands of this country and its leaders by yourselves anymore. That if we have to gather in North Dakota, if we have to gather in Miami, Florida to start a lawsuit, if we have to gather in New York to confront a board of elections, if we have to file a lawsuit across the country to address election fraud like Jill Stein, if we have to start our own YouTube channels, if we have to start our own organizations, never again will we be alone. And never again will the establishment ever convince us that we are alone. Because of that man, Bernie Sanders, we know that we're not. Because of that man, Bernie Sanders, we have Nina Turner, who is one of the most fiercest people I know who, with no guarantee of any future, who sacrificed her campaign, who was berated by the Democratic Party, that person who lost her election to support this revolution came into our lives because of Bernie Sanders, and was then put in charge of our revolution and said in front of the entire world, enough of the Democratic plantation. We're done. Our revolution will be supporting the most progressive candidate, period. It doesn't matter if they're independent, Democratic, Green Party, Libertarian, Republican. It doesn't matter what letter they have in front of their name as long as they're progressive. And she changed the entire game. Nina Turner and our revolution is a result of that revolution that Bernie Sanders started. Tulsi Gabbard, one of the most enchanting people that I have ever encountered, one of the most genuine people that I have ever talked to, one of the most evolutionary people that we have ever seen in politics, is running the most progressive foreign policy campaign that we have ever seen in the history of this nation. Tulsi Gabbard called out the neoliberals and the neoconservatives. How does she know the neoliberals are just as bad? Because she left the vice chair position in the Democratic Party after she saw how they treated that man who started this revolution. Before that, Tulsi Gabbard was the promised one. She was next. It was her turn. Tulsi Gabbard was a Democratic rising star. Tulsi Gabbard spoke at the Democratic National Convention just a few years before that. She was the darling of the Democratic Party. Guess what she did? They took all of her funding away. They ran multiple candidates against her and are still doing so. They attacked her and are still attacking her, and they're smearing her. But because of our collective experiences with this in that campaign, she knows, and we know, that means that she is on our side and that she is on the right side of history. Because of the revolution that Bernie Sanders started, and therefore Tulsi was compelled to join, we have a presidential candidate right now who was unafraid to call out both of the neoliberal and neoconservative establishments. We have a presidential candidate right now who is unafraid to step into the world of independent media, speaking on Joe Rogan, speaking on the Jimmy Dore Show, and maintaining all of those contacts, including contact with myself. I can speak personally where I have informed her about what's going on around the country and around foreign policies. And I can speak personally and say for a fact she has heard what I've said and has listened and thanked me. That she is constantly willing to learn and grow, because she learned that before Bernie Sanders' campaign, she knew absolutely nothing. Like all of us, that's how we feel. We have a presidential candidate right now in Tulsi Gabbard who was unafraid to call out the intelligence communities who have corrupted our democratic processes, who have invaded and orchestrated other countries and established coups and regime changes that have ultimately rendered countries totally destroyed. They have participated in the assassination of presidents, of leaders. They've been found guilty of colluding to kill people like MLK. They're hiding information about the assassination of JFK, and it took the revolution that Bernie Sanders started to bring in Tulsi Gabbard, help her evolve, cultivate her understanding of what we are really dealing with, and for her to have the bravery to stand up on that stage and say those agencies in their current form, under this current administration, under their current leadership, are not on our team and they must be held accountable. That speech happened because of Bernie Sanders' revolution. And if you need more proof of that, look at Tulsi Gabbard before she joined Bernie. Look at Tulsi Gabbard after she joined Bernie. It is almost two completely different people. And the craziest part is, if you've ever listened to Tulsi after, because trust me, she's very aware of what she sounded like before. She's not naive to that. She's extremely cognizant of it. And that's why if you've listened to her now, she sounds apologetic in every single speech that she gives. Like, I'm sorry that it took me this long to full-throatedly endorse Medicare for all, but we are here and we must get it done. I'm sorry that it took for me this long to completely and totally critique and undermine the military-industrial complex, but we're here now and we must get it done. I'm sorry that it took me this long to separate myself and hold both the neoconservative and the neoliberal establishment accountable, but I'm here now and we must get it done. This person that we have seen evolve out of her personal experiences through the Bernie Sanders campaign, this person who, when almost no one else would answer the phone, when almost no one else would believe me, this person who I called and said, Tulsi, I know this is going to sound crazy. I know you don't know me. I know nobody knows who I am. Or at least outside of the state of North Carolina. But they are rigging this campaign against Bernie, and I need someone who can help and someone who can get this message back. And she listened to me for an hour, tell her everything. That same person contacted me later to tell me she was, thank you so much for your videos. I've been paying attention. I appreciate it. That same person went on Joe Rogan. That same person went on Jimmy Dore, unafraid. That same person is standing in town halls, unafraid, not vetting a single question, taking every question that comes her way. Why? Because when you're speaking from the heart, when you're speaking from your experiences, you don't have to vet questions before you take them, because you were unafraid. And that fearlessness came from the evolution that Bernie Sanders started. I am not here to tell you who to vote for. I am not here to tell you not to vote for. Well, no, I lied. Don't vote for an establishment candidate. There you go. I'm not even here to defend Bernie. But I am here to tell you this. If you think that Bernie Sanders lost after we now have the strongest culmination of progressive independent media that we have ever seen. Jimmy Dore isn't here if we don't have Bernie Sanders. If Jimmy couldn't look to his friends, his co-workers, his colleagues, and say, you got it wrong, Bernie wouldn't want this. We have to stay true to our revolution, because Bernie Sanders himself said, and because he knew what he was up against by the end of this election, and said, you shouldn't listen to me if I tell you who to vote. He said, no, I would never tell you who to vote for. And if I do tell you, don't listen to me. Because he knew what we were up against. And Jimmy knew that. Jimmy Dore comes from that very revolution. Like myself, Tim Black comes from that very revolution. Like myself. Nina Turner, Tulsi Gabbard. Hell, even Joe Rogan has emerged as being on the left, to the point where his friends are attacking him because of it. His fans are attacking him because of it. Our revolution, every single candidate and every single influencer that has now been created because of our revolution, including the independent victories that they achieved. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a result of our revolution. I don't mean the brand, I mean the actual revolution. And every single one of these people have flaws. Every single one of us. None of us are right 100% of the time. None of us have all the answers. A lot of us make missteps and make mistakes. And we may not get it right 100% of the time. But there is a 100% chance that we wouldn't have a chance at this revolution, at this renaissance that we are currently in, if Bernie Sanders didn't look at his family at 72 years old and said, you know what, I'm bored. Let's go run for president. And if that man didn't stop everyone from cheering his name, only to let us know this isn't my revolution, it's yours. The frustration is well warranted. Bernie's foreign policy needs work. But you know what? That's what Tulsi Gabbard is for. And their campaigns, or excuse me, them two personally, are talking. Bernie has not been strong enough on election fraud. That's what Tulsi Gabbard and both Nina Turner are for. And they're all talking. I'm telling you, I'm not telling you because I'm guessing, I'm telling you what I know. Bernie Sanders, first of all, let me just clarify, he did not have a problem with the black community. In fact, his turnover rate with the black community was insane. I was part of the African American Caucus of North Carolina, which is in the South, which is the home of Durham, which is one of the most prominent black cities in the country next to Atlanta. Like, we're not next to Atlanta. They're like, when I say next to Atlanta, I mean they're like second most prominent, okay? We're not like, you know what I mean. Bernie didn't have a black problem. Bernie had a problem with black access, but that wasn't his fault. Because our chairwoman of the North Carolina Democratic Caucus loved Bernie. And the infiltrators from his campaign tried to prevent any interaction between them. And you know what? The truth of the matter is, it's hard for black people who are oftentimes put in situations where they have to work 2 or 3 jobs. They don't have time to go find out who the next presidential candidate is and who's the best option because they're too busy trying to pay bills. And the establishment media knew that, which is why they cut them off, showed Hillary, and tried to convince black people that she was for them. But guess what? The Super Tuesday, all that nonsense, that was before Nina Turner. And you can rest assured, Nina is going to take care of the South for Bernie Sanders. And she will defend fervently Tulsi Gabbard as well. And if you don't believe me, ask the people on Twitter who have seen the interactions between us where Nina defends Tulsi every chance she has an opportunity to. She will directly respond to people who ever assert that her and Tulsi are not still close. I was speaking to Nina Turner on the phone the other day, and she was telling me how excited she was about Tulsi Gabbard's campaign and how excited she was about the conversations that Tulsi Gabbard is going to start, and how excited she was for the progressive movement, and how excited she was for the independent media. Nina's job was a little bit different than it was before. Yeah, she's going to be helping Bernie Sanders, but Nina has an even more important job with Our Revolution, who will, I'm sure, continue to be victorious. Bernie Sanders had a lot of trouble getting endorsements last time. What do you think Our Revolution was for? You think he's going to have that much trouble getting endorsements this time? I doubt it. Bernie had a lot of trouble getting his message out in the early stages of his campaign. Niko, Convo Couch, Jimmy Dore, The Humanist Report, Tim Black, The Rational National. Who am I forgetting? Kyle Kulinski. Before, where Bernie only had a couple of people to get his message out and only had a couple of perspectives that he could benefit from, whereas the mainstream media in the past would ignore him because they knew that there was no organization behind that revolution. Oh, it's way different now. Now Bernie has a brigade of independent media behind him, both nationally on YouTube and on the independent side and local independent media. Whereas he had to wait and save money for the activism and build that loyalty up. There have been groups and chats created for and incubating for 3 years who have literally been waiting to launch for this revolution. But make no mistake, once again, this is a revolution. And these organizers are very aware that if we are going to be successful, Bernie has to be successful. If we are going to be successful, Tulsi has to be successful in her endeavors. And if we're going to be successful, Nina has to be successful. The three-headed monster that is this progressive revolution, all of them must be successful. All of them. There is no revolution without Tulsi. There is no revolution without Nina Turner. There is no revolution without objective reporting from independent media. This is not the time to become a sycophant. Yes, Bernie needs our help. Yes, we have to report honestly. We have to report the smears that will come against Bernie Sanders. But we have to do the same for Tulsi, because we have to stop perpetuating this idea that somehow it's better to put all of our eggs in one basket. That is not the case. Bernie and Tulsi have to make it to the convention if either one of them has a chance to win it. Because they're going to cheat. The superdelegates are going to try and get behind Kamala Harris. But if both of them get to the convention, if one of them humbly hands off their delegates to the other to put them over the top, there is no second vote. The superdelegates never come into play. And we go on to smash Trump in the general election when Bernie, Tulsi, Nina, the independent media world, eventually, because they're going to have to, the Democratic Party, Nina's Our Revolution, and all the candidates that they've gotten to the general election, all the activists and organizers from both Bernie Sanders' campaign and Tulsi Gabbard's campaign, when all of them come together after the convention where Tulsi and Bernie meet, come to a compromise, and figure out who is best to lead this country, when they all come together in that general election, that's it. That's checkmate. You understand that? Because no matter what happens, Tulsi or Bernie will be president, vice president, or secretary of state. No matter what happens, Tulsi or Bernie will be in charge of pushing Medicare for all. No matter what happens, all of a sudden, if Bernie wins, our revolution, not that they haven't been justified, but everything that they've done and are doing will be amplified tenfold, and you will see candidates getting support in fundraising like we have never seen. Somebody told me yesterday, Terry Baines, he is a Democrat. He hates the Democratic Party right now. I'm not a Democrat. I've never been a part of the Democratic Party. I've always been independent. But he told me that he's pissed at Bernie too. But he told me, he said, I'm pissed about the Democratic Party. He said, I want my party back. And I understood for those of you who don't understand why some people who are staunchly Democrat, like that was their older generation especially, who were staunchly Democrat and remember what it meant at the time to be a Democrat before Clinton came in and allowed the Koch brothers to completely ruin them. The JFK Democrats who became woke because of JFK. The FDR and Henry Wallace Democrats. Yes, the card-carrying socialist Henry Wallace, who was vice president to FDR, was one of the most popular politicians around the world. That Democratic Party, the reason that they want their party back, well, let me just put it this way. If someone came into your house, kicked your friends out, kicked your family out, painted the house, basically destroyed it so that it looked totally unrecognizable, but they still kept your address, they still put your name on the mailbox, you're trying to tell me that you're going to let someone else take your house without putting up a fight? So I understand. I'm for both. I am for both Dem Exit and Dem Enter, and I definitely am for creating and fostering a third party. But I will say this: if you are a Dem Enter, this is where you need to step up. Don't let somebody take your house. And you know what? They have kicked a lot of people out, but guess what? It's time to kick the door back in. I don't know why people, if you are like one of those people, oh, they cheated. Why would I even vote? Why would I even organize? You didn't want a revolution. You didn't want a revolution. You wanted someone else to fight the revolution for you. If you're someone who's upset and are intimidated by the DNC because they can cheat, okay, I don't know what you think a revolution is. A revolution is usually necessary because the leadership and the establishment is full of cheaters who don't have our best interests at heart. And at a certain point, the leaders of our revolution have to worry about their survival if they're going to continue the fight. I'm not saying that in regards to you have to vote for Bernie Sanders to fight that revolution. But if you're saying I'm not going to vote for Bernie because I know they'll cheat, I'm not going to vote because I know they'll cheat, I'm not going to donate because I know they'll cheat, I'm not going to volunteer because I know they'll cheat, I'm not going to organize because I know they'll cheat, then don't complain and say that Bernie's a coward. You don't got the right. You're a coward because you're scared of defeat. Because you felt defeat once and it hurt so bad because victory was so close. And you only then realize just how nefarious and powerful the establishment is. But this is what you don't get. Bernie realized that to begin with. That's why he started it. Tulsi realized that to begin with. That's why she joined. Nina realized that to begin with. That's why she sacrificed her congressional seat to join. We knew how bad the establishment was. That's why I left the campaign and joined Jared and Liz. That's why Tim Canova left the Democratic Party in Florida, became independent, and tried to fight and expose the fact that they're even cheating independents. No matter how popular you are. And that's another fighter who came from the Bernie Sanders revolution. Tim Canova is every bit as much of a hero as Tulsi Gabbard, Nina Turner, and Bernie Sanders. But Tim is a fighter. Nina is a fighter. Tulsi is a fighter. And Bernie is also a fighter. The most egregious thing that Bernie has done was that day where he suspended the rules and allowed the DNC to nominate Hillary Clinton. And for some reason, well, I know what the reason is. Some people just don't know. But if you were in the convention, if you were a delegate, then you understand. If you were outside of that convention, you would understand. If you were Nina Turner, you would understand. If you were Tulsi Gabbard, you would understand. If you were there during those ballot counts, you would understand. Bernie won. Bernie won the initial count. Bernie won the second count. Bernie's delegates were more passionate. Bernie's rallies, I mean, good God. There was a rally in City Hall. There was another rally simultaneously happening in the park. There were marches all week for him. Simultaneously, there were protests against the DNC and Hillary Clinton. When Bernie spoke, the entire crowd was in tears. And despite all of that, when we knew, because you kind of know what's going to happen, because the counts had already happened. But when you find out that you didn't only win once in the head count, but you won twice, and then they conducted a third count just to screw you over, he realized that he was up against something that he had not yet prepared for. In that battle, not the war, but that battle, he couldn't beat. Don't tell me he didn't care. Don't tell me he sold out. You don't sell out at 74, 73 years old. That's not how it works. Don't tell me that you didn't run around the country, drag your family along, potentially put your wife in the middle of an FBI investigation that we knew was illegitimate. Subject yourself to smears and attacks. Be lied about by people like John Lewis, who tried to claim that Hillary Clinton was at the civil rights movement, when we know she started Confederate Flag Day or was a part of it, her and her husband. When Bernie Sanders was literally behind John Lewis in the middle of a speech. Don't tell me that after having all of your activism and all of your work, all of his work and all of his activism questioned, that he wasn't as angry as you. Because what I remember and what I saw was at the moment that he did that, and anyone who was watching on that big screen in that park with me, as we were all in tears, when he voted to suspend the rules and nominate Hillary Clinton, the camera flashed to Clinton for a quick second, and it flashed back to Bernie Sanders. And he got up and he walked out. He didn't clap. He wasn't celebratory. There were no smiles. Moments after that, he was interviewed. And they said, "What are you going to do next?" And he told the world, "I'm an independent. And we're going back to this revolution." And he regrouped. And people at the time were frustrated because they didn't understand. They didn't understand. But I am blessed with a lot of empathy. And when you combine that with empathy, in case you don't know, I can sense people's feelings. I can get a sense for what is going through their mind and their body and their hearts based off of their body language, based off of their energy, whatever you want to call it. You can call it a sixth sense. It's not really all that crazy, but it's a thing. And I also understand politics. And I told everybody the next morning, I said, "Look, I'm pissed. I'm irritated. I'm just as upset. With everything that happened, I am just as upset. But he's doing this because he's running again. Because at the time, I knew he had never ran for office once. He never does that. He runs, he loses, he learns, then he wins. That's his whole career. He runs, he loses, he learns, he wins. He's a chess player. It's kind of a thing. He will let you take the king in order to get your queen. He will let you think you won the battle, but he's already setting up his pieces to win the war. And people, once again, who had the unadulterated gall to say Bernie's a coward, he isn't fighting. The same ones who, weirdly enough, ended up voting for Trump, who is actually a coward, who actually isn't fighting, and who actually is bending over to the establishment, saying that he was an isolationist, but now trying to establish a coup in Venezuela, trying to start fights in Iran, has all but leveled Syria. What was left of it after Obama with drone strikes. Got the nerve to call Bernie Sanders a coward? But let me ask you this. Y'all think Bernie Sanders is a coward and that he stopped fighting? Is that why he started our revolution and our revolution has been so revolutionary? That same our revolution that got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez elected, that beat the second in command, basically, who was being propped up to be Speaker of the House. That same guy got beat by a 29-year-old former Green Party and Bernie Sanders activist from the Bronx and became the most popular politician in the country because of Bernie Sanders' message. Okay. I guess it wasn't strategy. He was never planning on running. He just wanted to give up and sell out. Right? That's why right after he lost, because we don't define our victories by the establishment, remember. Right after he lost, he introduced legislation to make it cheaper for prescriptions in this country. And guess what that legislation did? Well, it would have passed had not only 12 Democrats voted against it in the Senate. Amongst those Democrats that were exposed, guess who did get exposed? Cory Booker, who was currently running for president, who I also said at that time was running for president, and who I also said at that time had officially killed his chances. Why? Because Bernie doesn't play chess. Bernie plays checker, and he sees the same things that we do. How did you eliminate a candidate 3 months after the presidential election is over? 2 years before the presidential election is going to start. Think about that. He then, once again, starts our revolution, have candidates all over the country elected. Because what was one of the biggest issues he had? We need people in power who can sway not only the local politicians, but the state politicians, galvanize and organize people, and also endorse the revolution that they came from. Yeah. Remember, he's a coward and he gave up fighting, but that same Bernie Sanders who was a coward got the wages for Disney workers raised. What did he get from that? I don't know. What did he get? What was the trade-off? Did he sell out for that too? I'm just trying to understand. Like I said, I got my problems with him, but I'm also not delusional. I'm not irrational. Is that why he went campaigning in West Virginia? Not even campaigning, excuse me. He went to go speak to them. It wasn't, well, you could say it was campaigning now, but he went to go speak to them. To tell them that they will not be ignored, regardless of their political affiliation, that their voices are just as important as everyone else's. Is that why he did that town hall on Medicare for All against Ted Cruz and obliterated him because he was done fighting? Is that why he introduced a Medicare for All bill, or no, he did introduce it. Is that why the $15 an hour bill got put on the floor and is still being debated right now? Is that why the Bezos Act was passed? Because he stopped fighting? I'm just trying to figure it out. Because I mean, sometimes I pick my battles. And I mean, I know that if I don't fight one fight today, it doesn't mean I'm not going to fight another battle tomorrow when it's more opportune. And he spent, instead of spending this, well, it's quite honestly the glory years, if you will, of his life with his family, instead of relaxing, that he deserved it, absolutely deserved it. He did everything and more. He set up other people to be successful in this movement. Bernie Sanders was a damn economy. Bernie Sanders himself created an economy, people. He did everything. But instead of relaxing with his family, instead of retiring, instead of spending time with his grandkids, he spent the last 2 years traveling the country, going back to Washington, getting rights for workers, going back to Washington, standing up for airport workers and unions, going back to Washington to vote and work on legislation, saving girls' lives from moving cars in D.C., going back to introducing legislation. He never stopped fighting. And I'm going to say, once again, in case you just joined in, this time is different. Last time, we went in with shields. Everybody, because we were kind of naive. We didn't know it was going to be this rigged. Nobody knew that Hillary Clinton had started running 7 years in advance. Good God, nobody knew that. Nobody, except for the people who were involved, clearly. Last time we went in with shields. This time, we're going in with swords. Understand that. And that goes for Bernie, Tulsi, and Nina, by the way. Last time, where the progressive movement that he started and the campaign itself was, it was, I won't say it was disjointed, but it was disconnected because of just the levels, right? There's levels to political organizing. That gap has assuredly been closed, I promise you. Because I talked to Nina Turner the other day. I can tell you all now. Trust me. They're aware of what's going on. They know what they're up against. And they're trying their best. Of course, they're not going to get it right 100% of the time. But they are trying their best to put themselves in a position where they can not only overcome the rigging, but ensure that we ain't going to have to deal with it because we're going to prepare for it. I talked to Tulsi's campaign and I DM'd Tulsi. She's aware of all the foreign policy rhetoric they're going to try to throw at her. And she's educating herself as well. And they're not going to be able to catch her off guard. Good God Almighty. She, if you've seen her, I'm sure, is also prepared for what they're going to throw at her. You all know, we have Fiorella and Craig from the Convo Couch. You all may know them on the network. Watch their show if you have not. You all may know them as journalists, but first and foremost, they are two of the leading activists in California. Sneha Sinha, another one of the most organized, first of all, and most networked activists around the country, helping out in New York. Myself, I'm in Miami. I know about my Michiganders. I know about my North Carolinians and South Carolinians who are also putting themselves in position. All the connections that were made after the election was over, that ultimately became more important than the connections that we made during the election. All the people that were exposed, even because I said since 2016 that people said, we can't be divisive and call these people out. We can't be divisive. No, I said for a reason. It is vetting season. We don't need any more cockroaches in our kitchen. Many people tried to co-opt this message. Many people tried to co-opt this campaign, and many people tried to co-opt our movement for their own personal agendas. And guess what? They've been exposed. And there will be new people. But guess what? The revolution is kind of interesting because you can't just jump into this revolution anymore unless you got receipts. I need them pictures at that Bernie rally from 2015. If you live in New York and you don't got a picture at the Central Park of you in that Central Park rally, then we ain't got nothing to talk about. See you at the next revolution because you can't be part of this one. I am personally in contact with the Sanders campaign. I am personally in contact with Tulsi's campaign. I'm meeting actually with one of her people today or tomorrow, one of these days. I am personally in contact with Tulsi. We are, if anyone has any doubts, we are all on each other's teams. We are all giving each other information, and we are all keeping each other on our toes. There is nothing more important in this world. And when I tell you nothing more important in this world, I mean nothing more important in this world than this revolution that must come into fruition in these next 2 years. When I tell you, this is not an exaggeration. Not your job, not your friends from high school who feel like it's too late for them to be, I'll worry about it later. Not your friends, not your coworkers, because there are people who have given up their careers for this revolution to see it get to where it's at right now. There are people who have separated themselves from their families. I'm not an exaggeration. A friend that I know from Alabama, after experiencing what this has come to be, is no longer in contact with his family after this revolution. And it's not even like he's super involved. He's just doing his little part. Not your ego, because your job may not be existing in 2 years if this revolution doesn't happen. Because this market that has already crashed, basically, that people haven't been paying attention to, this market is going to be worse in 2 years. These wars are going to be worse in 2 years. Your house and the interest on that loan may be gone in 2 years. And especially if Kamala Harris wins, it ain't like anybody going to be prosecuted for your house being gone. Your friends will be so stressed, they won't even have time to talk to you because they'll be working 2 or 3 jobs in 2 years. Your family will be so frustrated that you won't be able to take those vacations in 2 years because of all the economic impact. That debt from your college that demanded loans because they said you couldn't get a decent paying job unless you got this degree. Then when you get out, they rig the economy and pay you less than if you didn't get a damn degree 15 or 20 years ago. Now they're saying your degree is a high school diploma, but you still got to pay it back. And this very government helped rig that economy against you on behalf of the 1%. And when they come and garnish your wages, that apartment that you like and that car that you like won't be there anymore anyway. It seems, maybe you got everything. Maybe you're pretty well off. You're doing okay. You make about 100, 150,000 a year. Sounds good, right? That 100 and 150,000 a year won't help you when your doctor's bill is $50,000 to $60,000. Or maybe you have everything, but your family, your mother, your sister, they don't have health care. And you, with everything in your pocket, still couldn't help them because we don't have Medicare for all. And even with all the power, prestige, and status in the world, because you decided to sit out of this revolution, you have to watch your family suffer. There is nothing more important than this revolution. There is nothing more important than preparing and preventing this climate change, these extreme climate look at what we're dealing with. We just saw islands go underwater last year. I don't care what you think about climate change. It's happening regardless. I care about solutions and preparation and prevention. That's it. You want to argue with science? Fine. You can't argue with results. You can't argue with destruction. And I'm a preventative person. I don't like to react, even though I can. There is nothing more important than this revolution. Period. So, with that all being said, thank you all who stuck around from the beginning to the end. Thank you all who have already been part of this revolution. Shout out to everyone, and sorry for anybody I left out while talking in this video. I got a lot of love for you. Once again, I want to give my last shout outs before I go. Shout out to Fiorella and Craig from the Convo Couch on the network. Shout out to just, everybody who's been a part of the MCSC network in any capacity. Thank you all so much for helping us grow. We're probably going to be hitting 20,000 subscribers here today. If this is your first time watching, make sure that you subscribe right now, because this is about to get crazy over the next 2 years. And I promise you, we're going to be the first to get the scoop, because I'm going to text them to find out what it is. Shout out to Tim Black, who, when no one else in the media world would listen to me whenever I came out about election rigging, did a called out to the entire progressive world on Facebook and YouTube and said, "Hey, who knows Niko House? I need him on my show." Shout out to you, Unc. Shout out to Suzanne Murphy, who, when no one else, whenever I had an iPhone, a little clip-on mic, and a iPod stand, I thought I was doing something, and she said, "Nah, we're gonna make sure that your voice is represented in the way that it should be," and help me grow my show in the time where everyone else was basically turning their back on me for their own personal agendas. Shout out to Sneha Sinha, one of the best organizers, one of the best friends, one of the most loyal people that I've ever met, who is always going to bat for me. Is currently working on a book right now to showcase the faces of the revolution. Shout out to Jimmy Dore, who, when at a time where I was growing and people were actually going out of their way to avoid me because they didn't want to see me grow and become competition, Jimmy Dore personally reached out to me, asked me to come to his show in LA, or his studio in LA, and be on his show to give my analysis and to give my insight on the DNC fraud lawsuit and just progressive politics in general, and gave me an opportunity to showcase who I am and what I love to do and my knowledge of this stuff. Shout out to Michael Carmichael, my mentor from North Carolina, who for some reason believed in me more than I had ever believed in my damn self, who saw something in me that I was still trying to ignore at the time because I didn't want to be involved in politics. Shout out to Carolina Students for Bernie Sanders, where I got my start, where I founded that club, and we changed the game on them. Shout out to Jane Sanders, who heard me and saw me in a crowd in Fort Sumter, South Carolina, who came over to me and talked to me before I knew who she was and introduced me to Bernie, where we later on had that private meeting in Greensboro, North Carolina. Shout out to Nina Turner, who called me the other day just to tell me how much, not just to tell me, but telling me how much she loves the show and how much her and her staff has been watching. Shout out to her staff too. Shout out to her keeping it 100% real with me on the phone and just being her and what she's done with our revolution. In the struggle, the independent struggle that she goes through, that people behind the scenes as a black leader in this movement that doesn't necessarily favor the black, bold, female leadership. And yet she constantly puts herself in positions to be successful. Shout out to Kim Iverson, who has recently become a bold voice in favor of Tulsi Gabbard, defending her against smears, and I promise you will be a very bold voice going forward in the progressive movement. Shout out to Bob TV, who also became a recent strong supporter and a bold voice for Tulsi Gabbard as well. Shout out to Tulsi, who answered the phone when no one else at the time close to Bernie would answer the phone, and listen to me tell her about the rigging that was taking place. And then subsequently, because I'm telling you, Tulsi always has a place in my heart and always will, whether or not she wins or loses this election. She answered that phone to hear me talk about rigging. And do you think she listened? Because who is the only candidate to introduce substantive election justice legislation in the last 2 years? Tulsi Gabbard. Shout out to you. And shout out to everyone in this. Oh, shout out to Tim Canova. Shout out to you, man. Good God. Without you, we wouldn't know just how corrupt Debbie Wasserman Schultz is. We wouldn't know just how corrupt Broward County's election system is. Without you, Brenda Snipes would still have a job, and so would those two other election officials. Without you, we wouldn't have seen ballots being carried out and separated. We wouldn't have known Brenda Snipes had destroyed your ballots and therefore destroyed Bernie Sanders' ballots. We wouldn't have known that, okay, if you go independent, they will screw you worse with these machines. One of the most popular politicians in the country, one of the most popular politicians in Florida, they're trying to convince the country that he got a quarter of the votes he got in a primary. That less people came out to vote in the general election for his race than a primary election. So shout out to Tim Canova for showing us the light. And shout out to Jared and Elizabeth Lee Beck and Dan DeVivo for calling me, for listening to my story, listening to what I was telling you all about the rigging. And then Jared saying, okay, well, what should we do? Which was not really what I was expecting to hear. And he didn't only ask me what to do, he listened. And that DNC fraud lawsuit came from Jared and Elizabeth listening to a college kid. And now we're in the federal appellate court. But not after Jared was threatened, Liz was threatened, I was threatened, their family was threatened, other lawyers on the case were threatened, some of our plaintiffs were threatened. Not after they were attacked for being rightfully angry. Shout out to you guys. And shout out to everybody who's been paying attention to what we have been saying from the very beginning. Which is that I know Bernie Sanders' campaign is over. But I assure you, this isn't the end of the revolution. This is just the beginning. Look at where we started and look at where we have came. But most importantly, more than anything else, now more than ever over the next 2 years, always remember, find your balance, because we're going to need it. Peace.